Night, birthday night, is the night that we have a guest speaker. And the guest speaker that I want to introduce you tonight is somebody that I've had the honor, the pleasure of working with for the last 17 months. And that's coming to an end on the 28th of June as he graduates drug court. And Luke has got an incredible story of transformation, of coming from the streets, from drug addiction. Actually, I think a little bit before that, he had things going for him pretty good, and then they collapsed, and then he got into his addiction and went out on the street. He's had the opportunity to visit the inside of the Calgary Remand Center, and on a couple of occasions, once that we call the Miracle on 85th Street, and I actually think that things changed in that time, and maybe Luke will talk a little bit about that, but I'm so incredibly proud of you, Luke, for all the hard work you've put in, for the change you've done, and for where you are in your life today. So come on up, please, and share your story with us tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Luke. I'm an addict and alcoholic. So I'm supposed to share my story, 20 minutes, eh? Okay. Well, I guess I'll share a little bit about my background first. So my parents were war refugees from Vietnam. We're of Chinese descent, but they were born and raised in Vietnam, and during the war in the 1970s, they were basically forced out of the country and became war refugees. My parents came to Canada in 1979, and my dad talks about this all the time. When he came, he was deaf because he couldn't understand the language. He was dumb, couldn't speak it. Pretty much crippled because he couldn't drive, he couldn't walk around anywhere, and they got off the plane and everyone was given $5, and he talks about this all the time at a parka because they showed up in October, and coming from a country where they had never even seen winter before, it was a crazy experience for them. So fast forward, they moved to Calgary, and I was born in 1981. Now, when I was first born and growing up in a house, we had like 18 people living in the house because that was the way it was, right? I had a ton of uncles and aunts, and nobody could really afford to do anything because they were all working minimum wage jobs. And so, I saw the struggles my parents had to go through to work 2 jobs just to be able to support us. And growing up, my parents had given me everything they possibly could, but somehow I always wanted more. They bought their first home when I was about 6 years old, so we moved away from Grandma and Grandpa's place, and things seemed good. We had our first TV, and I didn't know any better, right? The first time I felt different was when I asked Mom and Dad if I could take hockey, because my friends in school were all in hockey, and they had to tell me no because they couldn't afford to do that. All they could do was pay the mortgage, pay their bills, and I shared this with Sister Jerry when I was doing my step 5. I think that was my first resentment. I've been able to let that go now, but growing up, I always felt different. I wasn't a part of anything. All these guys at school, all the cool kids were playing sports and had nice clothes and stuff, and I wasn't one of them. So I started drinking, smoking cigarettes, and smoking weed at the age of 12. And I remember this like it was yesterday, For the first time in my life, I felt like I was a part of something, and I was part of the cool kids. And I share this in my grad app. It's funny how something that I used to become a part of something and be accepted eventually led me down a path where I was so alone and just desperate, craving for attention. Because as I progressed in addiction, I started hiding it from everybody, and drinking alone, using alone, and trying to still fit in, but something was always missing. I always grew up like doing well in school. I always did well in school, even though I didn't really care. I graduated high school with honors and accepted to the University of Calgary with a scholarship in engineering. But even then, it wasn't right for me. I guess to rewind a little bit, while I was using weed and stuff in school, the only way I could afford to use it, because I didn't have a job, was to sell to other kids in school. So, I started fronting guys at the age of 12 and 13, and I'd have their allowance by the end of the week, and that's how I paid for all of my stuff. But I kind of put a stop to all that when I was when I got accepted into university, I felt I was the first kid in my family to go to university, and I thought I was going to change my life, right? Go to school, get a good job, and do all the things that my parents wanted me to do and that they couldn't. So I'm sitting in engineering, and one of my favorite TV shows is The Big Bang Theory, because you meet all these awkward guys and stuff, and these are the guys that I met in university, and I couldn't fit in with them. I wasn't a part of that. I laugh at it today because I realize that I could have been one of them, but I mean, even through university, that's when I started using cocaine just on the weekends, because I thought I could handle that, and I was drinking from Thursday to Sunday night, partying all week, and then trying to go to school afterward, and eventually I couldn't do it anymore. My addiction caught up to me. I finished about 3 years of engineering and computer science, and I had had enough. I couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't me. So I dropped out of university, and I got a realtor's license and started selling real estate because, I thought I had a natural knack for it, and things were good. This was in 2003, and anybody that's old enough like me to remember the boom in real estate, right, Pete? 2005 to 2008 were probably some of the best years we'd ever seen in the market. I was 22, 23 years old and closing like $500,000 deals, and things were great. In 2006, I started flipping my own houses. I worked with a bunch of contractors because, I was still 25 years old. I couldn't really afford to buy anything yet, but I figured if I partnered with some guys, I could close some deals. And I withdrew my license because anybody that's seen the Flip This House and any of those programs and stuff, it's awkward when you walk into a house trying to buy a home from someone and they realize you're a realtor. They think you're going to try to take advantage of them, right? So anyways, I dropped my license, and I worked with a good group of people, and we started making a lot of money through those years. I mean, upwards of over $100,000 a month sometimes. And that's when I started gambling really hard. Life was so easy, everything came so easily that I took it all for granted. There were days where I'd walk into the casino and drop $20,000, $30,000, and it's okay. I'd make it back in a week, right? But 2009 rolled around, and that's when the real estate crashed. Crashed. I went from owning 24 houses at the beginning of 2009 to literally nothing within 6 to 8 months. I was living in a $600,000 house, and I couldn't even afford to pay the electrical bill, the gas bill, and I was too proud to ask for help. I remember this like it was yesterday. In the middle of winter, I was sleeping in front of my fireplace in a sleeping bag with all the stuff shut off, and still I couldn't ask for help from anybody because I was too proud. I had always been on top. Money came easy. Everything, success was easy for me. So I started doing drugs. I found it as an escape, and it allowed me to kind of forget about all the failure and all the bullshit that happened during those years, and I felt accepted again, right? I started smoking crack, using cocaine, and drinking all the time. And then a few months later, I joined a company called World Financial Group, basically a life insurance and investment company, and I hit the ground running. I had a lot of credibility with people that I had been in the real estate industry with, so I brought a lot to the table. And quickly, in a matter of about 6 months, I became the top recruiter in Western Canada. And I was flown down to seminars in Las Vegas, LA, big conventions, and I learned from some guys that were making like $5-6 million a year, and I wanted to be one of those guys. So for that 6 to 8 month period, I busted my ass, and I moved up in the company. And then the financial crisis hit. Banks stopped lending money, and again, real estate had collapsed to a point where families that thought they had a whole ton of equity in their homes, it was no longer there. I remember sitting down with one family whose expenses were like $5,000-6,000 a month, and they were maybe pulling in about $4,000 a month, but they were living off the equity of their home. Well, when all of that disappeared, families went bankrupt. People started losing their houses, and all the good things I thought I'd been doing for all these families had all vaporized. All the people that I brought into the company were leaving because you couldn't make money in the industry anymore, and so we thought anyway. So back to the drugs, back to drinking, and I thought things were okay for a while. I started playing poker for a living. Between 2010 and 2012, I played poker full time, 6 days a week, and I thought I had the skills, right? As long as I stayed away from the floor in the casino, I was making about $15,000 a month and things were good, paying my rent. And then I met my girlfriend at the casino and things changed. I found out she was using meth at the time, but she seemed so normal. Everything was so good. So, you know what? I figured I'd give this meth thing a try. How bad could it be, right? And quickly, I learned that lesson. It brought out the compulsive gambler in me. And I remember I was sitting on a bankroll of about $120,000 at the time, playing poker and doing well. Things weren't bad. And in a matter of 2 or 3 months, that disappeared because I was gambling. I was compulsive. I mean, I talk about this in meetings. I was such a bad gambler that I didn't even care if we were throwing rocks at a pole. I'm betting you, and I'm going to try to win. And that's when I realized I had a problem, right? In order to afford my bills and continue living in a home and my drug addiction and alcohol addiction, I started selling drugs. And at first I justified this because I figured, you know what, people are going to buy drugs from somebody anyway, why not me? So I did that for quite a while. I hid my drug addiction from my friends and family for about 3 years, up until the point where it started getting out of control. I started hanging out with guys that were selling on the street, and for the first time in my life I realized how bad drugs and stuff could be, because up until that point I'd never really met a lot of users, right? I sold to people and I was gone. But for the first time I started hanging out with them, and I'm talking about guys that were living on the street that basically their addiction was their entire life. They were willing to do whatever it took. And so in a matter of a few short months, I didn't even care anymore. As long as I got my next fix, that's all that mattered. And for the first time I got arrested, this would have been 2013. Partying, using drugs, thinking everything was okay. And once I was arrested, things changed. I got out on bail and still didn't realize it was a problem. Continued selling drugs, continued using, thinking that everything was going to be okay, right? Waiting for the trial because I thought I'd be able to beat it. And 3 months later, back in jail. Right back to the same thing. And even then, I'd blame people around me. It was bad luck. It was somebody around me that caused these issues. It wasn't because I was a bad head. But, it progressively got worse. And up until the last time I went to jail, I didn't even see that. Each time I got out, I'd have somebody waiting for me outside with a pipe ready to go and, hit the ground running again. But the very last time I went to jail, I guess this very second last time I went to jail, it was completely different. I got raided by the cops, and even then, as they were kicking the door down, I was still trying to get a hoot in. And I remember going downtown and them interrogating me and stuff, and I was like, what did I do wrong? They're trying to get me to rat on myself, and obviously I wasn't going to do that. But at the time I lived with my brother and my nephew too, and they threatened to charge my brother and take my nephew away. They said social services would be there to take him away that day, so I had to own up to it, right? And I remember talking to my lawyer at the time, and she told me, you couldn't just stay clean and stay out of trouble just so I could, take you through these trials and stuff. And she's like, you're looking at about 10 years. Realistically, I don't think you're going to get anything less than that. Even if we beat 2 out of your 4 trials, you'll be looking at about 10 years. So for the first time in my life, I realized there was a problem, right? After getting out on bail 5 separate times, thinking that everything was going to be okay, this time it wasn't. And for the first time in my life, my brother and my family and everybody else had given up on me. I share this at meetings all the time, sitting there in jail when you're given that opportunity to use the phone, but there's fucking no one left to call because I had burnt every single bridge. I felt more alone and in complete darkness for the first time in my life. And that's when I started to pray. I've never been spiritual. I was forced to go to a Buddhist temple as a kid growing up, but I never found God. I never believed in any of that. I tried to play God for years. And for the first time, I prayed. Not just for a way out of jail, but for a way to change my life. I wanted my family back in my life, and I was willing to do anything it took. Now, sitting in jail, I applied for the TKO program, and anybody that's been through that knows it's not an easy go. All the other times I'd been in jail, even while I was inside, I was using, because there's always a way to get some drugs in there. And I actually gave it a real chance. You know, while sitting in TKO, I learned for the first time about my addiction, and that, you know, I was born with this disease. As much as I hate to admit it, I had a disease. And I never saw this before, because my dad and my uncles and everybody, when they have a drink, they're able to put it down and go to bed, but I couldn't. Looking back at all those years where I was always one of the last ones standing, I was always the last one using, and people would go home, they'd go to bed, and I just didn't understand, like, why they could stop. It just didn't make any sense to me. So I applied for drug court at the time, and because I was looking at 6 to 10 years, I was denied almost immediately. I figured, you know what, if I stay in TKO and graduate the program and give it another go, maybe chances are they'll accept me. So I stayed in the program and graduated there, and fortunately I was lucky enough to stick behind, and I stayed on as a mentor on the unit. And then I applied again, and I got denied again. So at this point I had broken up with my girlfriend, and my family wasn't talking to me. I had no more friends. All these supposed bros that were all out there on the street, no one gave a fucking shit about me, man. You know, life was tough. And that's when God sent Carrie. You know, I'll forever be grateful for Carrie, because he came to talk to me on the TKO unit, and we shared with each other our stories. And Carrie had a very similar story. He told me about the struggles he went through, and that he wasn't getting into drug court either. And he gave me the word of advice that I'll never forget. He said, if you really want to change your life and you really want this for yourself, keep trying. So instead of playing out to the 6 years that they wanted, I stayed on the unit, and I called my lawyer and I said, let's try for drug court again. And she's like, well, you're not going to get in. And I'm like, well, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. She's like, even if you have to stay there for another half a year? I was like, yeah, just do it. So I stayed there for 9.5 months, you know, continued doing the program and prayed. I didn't give up praying, because I saw these guys praying and going to church in jail, and they all seemed to get out, and shit, some of them were doing a lot more serious stuff than me, right? And finally, after 9.5 months sitting in remand, those prayers were finally answered. They gave me that chance. And I'll be honest, man, anybody that's in drug court right now, the first thought was, if I get it, you know, it's a ticket out of jail, right? And if things turn bad, I could always run. So I remember Peter coming that first day to test me right before I got out, and he's like, word has it that you're going to run. I'm like, what? No. I'm like, and even if I was going to run, I wouldn't tell you, man. Right? So I'm like, no, I'm really grateful for this. And I remember walking into court that first week and telling everybody how grateful I was for being out of jail, and hearing the birds chirp for the first time. And it was wonderful, right? I started believing that shit myself, man. And I figured, you know what, as long as I stay under the radar and stay out of trouble, I'm going to coast through this thing. Man, I've seen some guys. I saw Tom Parks do it. How bad could it be? And, you know, things were okay for a while. You know, just learning about my addiction. I did learn a lot while I was in treatment at Simon House, because I never thought I really was an addict until going through that program. And as anybody that's gone through Simon House knows, it's not an easy program, right? You guys coming and going, but I figured, you know what, just stay under the radar and things will be good. And then I met the real Nancy for the first time. And, you know, I'm grateful for it today. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I was at the time, because I'm not. And you know, I figured it just felt like she was out to get me. And of course, my stupid addict thinking kept thinking, like, you know, she has it in for me. It doesn't matter what I do, she's gonna hate me for this, so fuck, whatever. And I always tried to take the easier, softer way. Pete always bugs me about this, but it really is true. I mean, all through school, all through growing up, you know, I've never had a labor job in my life. To be honest, I never even had a job until I came to drug court. And I always tried to find the easiest way. And for a long time, I got away with that. But for the first time, when I had to hit the pavement, as Pete said, and actually try to look for a job, I was like, man, do these guys know who I am? I'm not going to go work a 9 to 5. Like, this is ridiculous. So I thought I'd stay under the radar and get that out of the way, right? But then Nancy comes along, and my plans changed. So needless to say, I ended up losing my housing at Simon House and going back to the Miracle on 85th Street. You know, Pete talks about this, but I truly believe it really is a miracle. Because this time when I went back, everything felt different. I didn't feel a part of the crew anymore. You know, all these friends and bros and stuff that were inside that were fucking still inside after all this time. They all came to me and they're like, you know, I told you couldn't make it in this. The program's bullshit. Just go do your time. It'd be a lot easier that way. And, you know, for a little bit I was thinking maybe it was easier. And those 2 weeks felt like 2 years in there, Pete, because I remember calling Peter every day, wondering if there was a bed open for me, because, you know, when I went to turn myself in that day at court, I knew I was going back, but I wasn't ready to run. Like, things were starting to happen for me as I was working the program, and my family was talking to me again. There was no way I was going to take off. So while I was sitting in remand this time, I finally made that decision that, you know what, I remember promising myself that I was going to do whatever it took to finally change my life. And somewhere along the way, I got complacent again. So that reminder when I was back there for those 2 weeks, I realized this place wasn't for me anymore. That revolving door was bullshit. All the guys that have been in and out of there their entire life, like, rehabilitation doesn't fucking work in jail, man. We all know that. All the guys that have been there, we know. You know, we're forced to go in there and we promise ourselves we'll do whatever it takes, but 99 out of 100 guys that walk out the only guys that don't go back in are the guys that fucking die. And all these years that we were using, I've lost a lot of friends, but I buried all those emotions inside because things happen, right? And I finally gave into that. I surrendered for the first time in my life, and I told God, you know what? Whatever you have planned for me, I'm willing to accept those consequences. So if I don't get back in the program, then so be it. I'll go do my time. But thankfully, I was allowed a second chance, right? I got out and I got my first job and things were going okay, you know? By that point, I think I'd been about a year sober and I thought I had this again. You know, I started making some money, started developing an ego, and bought a Mercedes. And Pete right away reminded me that, you know, I was headed down the wrong path. You know, I thought I could start a relationship because I had been a year sober, right? I got this shit. Things are good now. And I started a relationship and I thought things were fine, but, you know, it was a slippery slope, man. Things weren't fine. If I continued down that path, I'm positive I would have definitely relapsed because I mean, I started working the program. I got a good sponsor and I started working the program, but something was still missing, and I didn't realize this until I'd done my second set of steps and I did my step 5 for real this time. You know, I walked into that meeting with Sister Jerry thinking, you know, I'm just gonna tell her a couple of things and get this over with, but she made me feel so comfortable while I was doing that I shared with her things I never thought I'd ever tell anybody in my life. You know, things I had forgotten, I'd buried for a long time. Doing what I was doing, I'd seen a lot of stuff. Guys shot, you know, kneecaps broken, fingers cut off, whatever. I mean, I'm not trying to wrap myself out here because I'm doing my time, right, Pete? But I mean, I saw a lot of shit, man, and I tried to forget about those, you know, drunken guys because they owed drug debts, and I didn't think I was sick. But once I got all those things out and I walked out of that meeting, like, I felt 100 pounds lighter. For the first time in my life, I felt God's presence. I really did. And I can definitely pinpoint it to that day was when my life changed. Because I realized, you know what? Yeah, we've all done some bad things in the past, but I'm given a second chance now. I'm going to do something different, right? And I started working a real solid program. I worked with my sponsor really hard. I did my step 8, made the list, I started remembering a lot of people that I'd harmed and I had hurt, and I started doing my step 8. The first few seemed really easy because I did it with mom and dad and my brothers and some close friends and stuff, and they all forgave me because, you know, as long as I lived a clean and sober life, they were all happy. So I was riding on this pink cloud for a little bit. And the very first time I did a real step 9 that didn't go my way, I thought the whole world was coming to an end. Because one of my real estate partners I ran into, you know, one of the guys that I had lost everything with, like, I mean, as I was talking about the real estate stuff, I watched like $4 million vaporize in a matter of 6 to 8 months. our books disappeared. And like, I'd never felt more worthless or useless in my entire life. And one of the guys that was partnered with me at the time, he was going through a lot of rough shit in his life too. So when I ran into him and did my step 9, he was the first guy that didn't forgive me. And I'm like, fuck, how could you not forgive me, man? I've been clean for over a year. Do you know who I am? Like, how could you not forgive me? And he blamed all of his failures in his life on me and the fact that our company had gone belly up and stuff. And I remember calling my sponsor as soon as I got out of there, and I was like, hey, he didn't forgive me. Is this normal? Like, this isn't right. And my sponsor told me that, you know what, we don't do our step 9 to feel better about ourselves. We do it to clean house, right? To get rid of all the bullshit so that we can move on with our life. And that reality check was what I needed, because you know what, not everyone's going to be able to forgive us. You know, I have a lot of friends that are dead now that I can't say sorry to. So, I mean, to make the living amends, to write your letter, to burn it, do whatever your sponsor suggests to you, because once you get all that shit off your chest, you become a new person. So anyways, fast forward now, all through drug court, I thought I was staying under the radar and things were good. And the first time I started feeling bad again, I broke up with my girlfriend. And when Pete had warned me about getting in relationships and shit, I was like, whatever, I got this, Pete. I don't need to listen to that. But, I almost used. And if it wasn't because Pete called me down to his office that day and we talked, and I let a lot of shit out that day, I don't think I'd be sitting here today, Pete. Thank you for that. I realized that I still had a lot to work on in my program. And I did my 3rd set of steps with my sponsor, and I thought things were good again. Everything was back to normal, and somewhere along the way, I got complacent again. I started lying about meetings I'd gone to. I'd go to 1 or 2 a week, but I started filling in the meeting sheets, and I thought I was the only one, but I guess I wasn't. And I started what was called meeting gate. Apparently, it's a bad thing to lie in court and say tell the judge you've been going to your meetings when you haven't, because technically he could have thrown my ass back in jail. And thank God for that reality check too, because I was starting to slip again. And now looking back, I realized that. Had I not been caught and I would have graduated sooner, who knows where that would have led me. But it's funny because when I go to meetings, I always get something out of it. I always sit there and, whether it's the fact that I have something to share or it's the newcomers that really do it for me. I listen to some of these guys' stories and the pain and suffering and shit that they go through. I never want to go through that again. Never. Now my family is back in my life. Things are great. And I can't say that for a lot of my friends who were using with me. Like, I've been in 38 high-speed chases in my life. Gotten away 36 times. And I'm still alive. Some of the guys I know are not so fortunate. And all the amount of drugs and stuff I've used through the years, like, I'm lucky I'm not dead. But, I mean, if I'm going to continue throwing my life away like this, I might as well be dead because I'm just living as an empty shell, right? And now, things are good. Life is really good. I'm 795 days sober today. And I wouldn't trade the worst day in sobriety right now for the best day I ever had while I was using. My family is now back in my life. My mom can trust me again. For a long time while I was using, no one gave a shit about me. The only bros around me were the guys that had anything to benefit from me. And now I have a strong support. I have real friends and brothers in the program now that are there for me. Anytime I need somebody to talk to, they're there to listen. And you know what? They don't get anything from me, but at the end of the day, they're still there. I couldn't say that 2 years ago. I couldn't. And the promises are finally coming true. The promises that they were reading earlier, they really are coming true for me. Sometimes quickly, mostly slowly though. And that's okay. I've learned to accept that, right? Today, when I give someone my word that I'm going to be somewhere, that I'm going to do something, I always make sure I do it. Today, I'm a man of honor and integrity again. And if it wasn't for drug court and the AA program, I wouldn't be that today. You know, the only advice I really want to give to anybody that's in the program right now, that's in drug court, is keep doing what you're doing and find a good sponsor and work an honest set of steps, man. Because, let's face it, all the times you tried to quit, all the times you thought you didn't have a problem, where did that eventually lead you, right? Once I was able to give up my ego and my self-will and actually listen for the first time in my life started getting better. And I mean, yeah, 17 months was not short. It felt like 17 years sometimes. But now looking back, like yeah, the days flew by fast, but where the hell did the time go? Like, I'm 37 now. Yeah, I'm 37 years old, man. And I thought that, you know what, if I went and did my time and I got out and I'd be 40 years old, I could always start my life again. But who am I kidding? Life only goes downhill when you hit 40, right? So, oh, did I offend anybody there? Sorry, Jerry. Let me take that back. You know what? If you live a proper life and you're doing what we're supposed to be doing, life is great, man. I mean, as I said, I wouldn't trade my worst day today for my best day back while I was using. And the reason is because I really have true friends now. There's so many people on my phone now that I can call anytime that are there for me. You know, I live with one of my best friends right now, and we're there for each other every day. We're able to share anything that's bothering us. And sometimes that old addict thinking still leads me down the wrong path, but once I'm able to get that out and somebody else that's there to understand me, life's not so bad, man. Life's not so bad at all. I could always be back in there eating kimchi and chocolate bars and shit again, right? Yeah, the burrito. Yeah, I don't miss that either, man. But, I mean, drug court changed my life and saved my life forever. My mom will always be grateful because she has her son back in her life. You know, I'm able to watch my nephews grow up and stuff now, things I never thought I could ever do again, because while I was sitting in jail, I didn't think they'd ever want to see me again. And, you know, for anybody that's still struggling, you're not alone. I still struggle. I still go through a lot of bullshit. And there's still moments in my life where I think about using or picking up a drink. But my gratitude list is what saves me time and time again. I have it on my phone that I pull up every day. I've got 180 things on my gratitude list right now. Things that are back in my life today that I didn't have while I was sitting in jail. Things I never thought I'd ever get back again. And every time I read that list, it brings me right back down to earth, because life could always be worse. You know what I mean? But again, you know, thank you, everybody. Congratulations to everybody that's taking their milestones today. It gets easier from here, I promise. So thank you.
Yeah, there's only one thing I picked up on that whole message, and that was 38 high-speed chases. I think I was in 45, but I was in the car behind you. Luke, thank you. Thank you for sharing from the bottom of your heart was what you did, and that's what it's all about.